Okay, good morning. Welcome to part four of looking at the Max Ritvo poem, Living It Up, thinking about close reading, research, argumentation, development of all of these ideas into a single coherent whole. Um, and what I hope you've picked up on so far just is that what we're basically doing is trying to chase any rabbit holes that we can find as we read it closely. So we've looked at things like the without thought moment is not necessarily being negative. The idea of being unsettled, right, with the imagery of this, both as readers and as the speaker here, of being unsettled as a kind of way toward clarity, to feel more present in the moment, because we have, in some sense, this is a Carpe Diem poem, a seize the day poem. So we have a lot going on with this one. We've also mentioned at the end of the last video a kind of vulnerability. I know we mentioned that because I wrote it down, and I just want to keep stressing to you that a lot of what this is just taking good notes as you go forward. And I think that the real life part of that, why we should do this, is so that we don't forget what we're trying to think about, that we take a little bit of ownership, a little bit of value in our own thoughts, and we can come back and revisit them later. I think there's a value in that. So I hope that if anything, it becomes interesting along those lines. So we've gotten through to the second, well, technically the third sentence, first one with the question, and then one sentence, two stanzas. And then we move into stanza 5 here. Well, stanza 5 and stanza 6, you can see I bracketed them out. That was an early note from me. I think this was an important moment inside of the poem. So the line says, right, I wish you would let me know how difficult it is to love me. So that's the sentence and the stanza, followed by, then I would know you love me beneath all that difficulty. So to me, this kind of reads like I guess, sort of hypothesis. The word then is what does that, right? This here. It's been a long time since I took a class where you had to discuss hypotheses in terms of making a lab report, but it does seem like it's set up with this if-then statement. Though the if in this case, right? So if, right, if you would let me know how difficult it is to love me, then I would know you love me beneath all that difficulty. So it's kind of set up as a kind of hypothesis, but it's very much a philosophical hypothesis. So it's about knowledge, right? This word know here, and then know repeated here. So know how. So if we look at these two stanzas side by side, we can see how they're mirroring one another, and we can hear that mirroring when we read it. So first we have, of course, the I-U relationship. Wish kind of coming back to want. So we see here that he's been sort of extrapolating his own emotions into something else, right? Into these spirals, these springs. And in here, the wish is now him. So he's projected out here. Now he comes back. I wish you, okay, so directly to this one. Now we're in wish, we're in fantasy world. Would let me know. Okay, so we have this first line. I wish you would let me know. We end on the word know, right? So I'm going to write down the word. I think it's epistemology, which is just a understanding of how we arrive at what we know, or phenomenology, I think, is another way to think about this. So I might look into these later. I might not at all, right? That's because I don't really understand philosophy that well. I enjoy it, but like those are some words I know. I might go research those. I might not, but I'm going to write them down, because otherwise, if I don't, then I definitely can't do it. So I wish you would let me know. So he's landing hard on the line break with know, with knowledge, right? Gnosis. So let's write that word down and think about how can we explore that, okay? How difficult it is to love me. So wish, know, difficult, love, wish, know, difficult, love. That's the projection, that's the trajectory of this one. Wish, know, right? Then the break, difficult, love. So two different things here happening, right? And then we move down into this next part of this. Then, so the if then I would know, love, okay? So those are different placed. Know that you know you love me beneath all that difficulty. So if we write them back down, the first one goes wish, no, difficult, love. The next one goes no, love, difficulty, right? And what we're missing in this second sentence here, the second stanza, is the wish, because it would have become granted here. So we don't need it in this second sentence. But it's all based on this would, which I believe is the subjunctive voice. And we can just look that up. Also, we can just go to email and say, what is the disjunctive voice? It is would. And I'm going to type that in. I know I'm not sharing my screen with you. I'm pretty sure it's subjunctive voice. Auxiliary verbs could, would, and should might also express the subjunctive mood, especially when one expresses a condition contrary to fact, right? I would be prepared. So it is a subjunctive. It just means that it doesn't necessarily means that it hasn't happened. It's like a wish, right? In and of itself, it's like a future pretense mood is what would is. So they're all predicated on this idea. There's a mirroring, and the language itself is, of course, what we're looking at right now. But what the tone of this is really complicated. It goes back to this distancing that we saw from the very beginning, which is the speaker here doesn't know, right? Would let me know how difficult it is to love me. In other words, what we're not getting, what the speaker's not getting from the you in this poem, is an admission of the speaker's complicated existence, of saying, you're very difficult to be in love with. This is very hard for me. And because that doesn't happen, right? Then if it did happen, he says, if you would tell me that it's difficult to love me, then I would know, right? I would have that knowledge again that you love me beneath all that difficulty. So there's like an admission here, an admission of the truth in this moment, of saying, like, maybe this is beating the point too much, but basically saying, I know I'm hard to love, but you don't tell me that. So by not telling me that, it makes me question your love, because you're hiding that from me. And if this was true and this was real and it was strong enough, then we could risk that. There's a risk here as well, right? And this, right? If we have to risk holding each other, breaking our predetermined function, in order to really know what it means to be two people in love with one another. So, I mean, this is a really beautiful idea when we think about living it up, really, because living it up and carpe diem, I think is inherently about risk, right? Taking a risk, which of course is back to vulnerability and the nature between these two elements. So this to me reads very much like, very much in this space, reads to me that the two things are back and forth. Take the risk of telling me that you love me because of my difficulties or with my difficulties, and that will actually show me that we have more love entirely. So I'm gonna have to pause this real quickly because my son just woke up. So I'll be back when he's settled. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Not that any time passed for you, but let's get back into the poem here. Yeah. So the last thing we were really talking about was carpe diem is risk. And so if we have this section here, right, which we went over, kind of how the mirroring becomes a type of risk, the hypothesis becomes the kind of risk in this one. We've noticed how distance has sort of been developing this whole time, including this space here. And also I think this difficulty, because repetition of difficult into difficulty here, it very much feels like it's connected back to this. I don't know that it is for sure. Like, I don't have, like, there's no algorithm for this, but it does feel like the bed is on fire sounds a lot like one person making life difficult, which maybe is him. So, right, like he's doing this, he's torching it, or he feels like he's torching it. And her reaction seems to be, or I'm assuming their reaction is much more about levity, finding some kind of humor in it, which doesn't actually, sound like a bad response to this, right? That, like, you have a very difficult partner. We know that Max Ritvo, the poet, was dying, and that's a difficult process, of course. That's an incredibly understated comment that I just made, but it makes me wonder if there's laughter up here isn't a response to this kind of grief. So we have a poem now that's kind of broken down into, so far I would call it like 3 parts. Part 1 is this initial question, initial situational problem, which is the bed is on fire. Part 2 is the fact that the you leaves, creates a distance. Part 3 are about the springs and sort of moving the self into this inanimate object. And then part 4 is bringing it back in and kind of creating this hypothetical scenario where if the partner would let him know how difficult it is to love him, then I would know you love me beyond all that difficulty. So we're seeing now that carpe diem is built into this idea of take the risk of being very vulnerable. We're back to vulnerability, its connection to risk taking. And then I think that's a research area as well. Like, what can we find out about the value of taking risks, the value of remaining vulnerable in personal relationships, and just sort of overall. So there's a lot going on in this one. I think that we can also mention how the couplets seem to mimic what's going on inside of this one. We start very alone, and then we couple up all the way to the end, which does sort of suggest that they're going to stay together, or there is a connection. And this is sort of one of those moments of just difficulty. But the difficulty, of course, is being alive, right? Just being alive creates difficulty. So again, that kind of drives me back into Buddhist thought as well. So there's a bunch of information in this one. And what I want you to take from this in the last little minute of this video is, while we close read, all we're doing is, and I'll show you my page, though it's going to look like chicken scratch to you. I'm just taking down the notes that I have that come out at me, both in terms of idea and concept and in terms of the close reading. And the last comment I want to leave here is that, could you find a source that talks about like house fires that start in the bed, right? Like a statistic about that, because that's something you saw. You absolutely could. And, I don't know if it's going to help explain the poem any, but sometimes that's where our research goes into. So you don't know where that will lead you, right? Will this lead you to like arson in relationships? I don't know. I don't really know. But the idea is that what I'm more interested in are these, you think about like, oh, this sounds like a Carpe Diem poem, or like a Seize the Day, or maybe it sounds more like a confession to you. Whatever it is that it sounds like, we write that down because we can research examples of that and use that to kind of to create a broader, more a less direct approach to the poems. We can look at it from an angle, and from that angle shine a light in a different way that helps better explain it. So we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more couplets toward the end, and we can go over those in the next video. But for right now, keep in mind that we've hit probably 6 or 7 really good research areas. They may have some connection, they may not. We're starting to see this as a book so far about what it means to be alive, to actually live it up in the presence of death. And how that connects back into 4 reincarnations. We'll have to see as we continue moving forward. So that's that video. Good luck, and like as always, send me emails if this isn't making sense, or if you need me to cover something a little bit different. So like I said, my next video will probably have my son in or around it. I apologize for that, but we will do our best. All right, morning, bye y'all.